Hello, everybody. My name is Kara Kroeger, and I'm a certified herbalist and nutritionist. I'm also an agroecology educator. And today I want to talk with you about human health and nutrition. And this is a presentation that I created for some agroecologists, but it is focusing on human health. And ultimately, it is really helpful to everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and share my PowerPoint. All right, so I have a business called Balance Your Gut, which is a nutrition consulting business that helps people rebalance their microbiome and overcome GI distress. And I also have a podcast called the Land Food Life Podcast. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about my services or listening to the podcast, you can find it here at these links, landfoodlife.com or balanceyourgut.com. I hope you'll visit that. So I want to start talking about why we should prioritize nutrition. This is really important because we are living in a world that is full of stress and a lot of different chemical exposure. No matter how good of a job we're doing taking care of our nutrition and different things like that, we are exposed to a lot of chemicals in this world. And so ultimately, that stress and these chemicals and these various things that we're going through in life are basically causing us to need more nutrition than we've really ever needed before because all of those things use nutrients in our body to help keep homeostasis. And so instead of those nutrients going towards optimal health, they're going towards helping us break down the chemicals or deal with the stress. And so we really need to prioritize nutrition so that we have a fighting chance in this world that is full of a lot of stress and chemical exposure. Additionally, nutrition is just the foundation of our health, right? Hippocrates said, all health begins in the gut, and many indigenous cultures have had for years and years, thousands of years, practices that are helping build the gut. And so maybe we didn't know about the microbiome back then, but we do now. But they knew intuitively by way of just living in oneness in the world. And so ultimately, these are very long term practices that as humans we've been needing to do. But now we have to focus on our gut health more than ever because it really is the foundation of our health. And so we're going to talk about that today. We also just want to heal disease and create wellness in humans and also in animals and on the land because without one being healthy, the other can't be healthy. And so it's one health, right? So these microbiomes are the things that really link us together. They link the land, the animals, and humans together. And if we can nurture these microbiomes, we can grow more nutrient dense food and we can heal many of the ailments that we're struggling with today, both inside of our bodies and on the land and in animals as well. So I want to talk a little bit about managing stress. And I want you to think for a minute about the last month. And I want you to think about all the things that you felt stressed about over the last month. Maybe it was finishing a big presentation. Maybe it was losing a loved one. It could have been having a illness that you were struggling with. It could be having a teenager. It could be good stress. It could be falling in love. It could be so many different things. So I want you to think on all the different things that could have stressed you out over the last month. And then I want you to rate your stress level with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. And I want you to get that number in your mind. And then I want you to think about your coping strategies. What did you do in order to improve those experiences of stress? Did you do meditation? Did you drink a lot of water and stay hydrated? Did you make sure that you were eating food on a regular basis so your blood sugar stayed stable? Did you maybe not look at social media or the news because you knew it was going to stress you out? Or did you drink a bottle of wine in the evening, maybe smoke some cigarettes, potentially ate a lot of fatty, sugary foods? Did you scroll and scroll and scroll on social media or binge watch a television show that maybe had a lot of violence in it? These are the things that we can cope with. And so it's hard to manage stress when you're stressed because we get into a place where our brain waves become very incoherent and they become very disorganized. And we often choose to do the things that create greater disorganization in our brain when we're under stress and our heartbeat races, and we are oftentimes eating sugary foods or coffee that makes our heartbeat race even more. And so ultimately, we're putting ourselves under, we're already under a great deal of stress, but then we feed that stress and it becomes a little bit of a vicious circle. And so the reason why I'm starting out this talk with looking at stress is because it has so much to do with your health. It's probably the number one contributor. I mean, eating is important, eating good, healthy foods is important, but in some ways, I think it's how we're viewing things more than anything. So I want you to reflect on that. And I want to talk a little bit about, how we got so degraded. How did we get to this place where we are dealing with so much chemical exposure and dealing with so many health issues? Well, first of all, in the environment, we've got a lot of degradation going on. We've got the loss of soil organic matter at epic rates. We've lost 57.6 billion tons of topsoil in the Midwest alone in the last 160 years. And that soil is what carries the fertility and what makes our foods nutrient dense. And so we've lost a lot of the fertility in our soils. Additionally, we've got a lot of agriculture chemicals going into the land and onto our foods, glyphosate being the main one. And unfortunately, that glyphosate is an antibiotic. It's an antibiotic in the soil and it's an antibiotic in our guts. And so ultimately, it kills off the microbiome, worsening how the plants can utilize nutrients from the ground because the microbiome is what mobilizes and makes available to plants the micronutrients that are in the soil. And so as we kill off that microbiome, we are poisoning the microbiome. As we kill off that microbiome, we're poisoning the soil and we're poisoning our own guts as well because the microbiome in our guts is being killed off by that glyphosate. Additionally, we've got about 350,000 new chemical substances coming in over the last 40 years to our spaces, and we are basically ingesting those, putting them on our body, breathing them in, and our body just is having a hard time tolerating that. So from a human health degradation perspective, the things that we're doing in that arena is we are eating too many refined foods. So sugars, refined flours, a lot of chemicals going into the foods. And these refined foods have a lot of calories without very much nutrition. So we are basically starving ourselves. We're calorie rich, but low nutrition. So we're gaining weight because we are taking in a lot of calories, but then we're not getting any nutrients in there. The average American adult eats about 17 teaspoons of sugar per day. So that is a lot of sugar, and basically that requires our body to use more nutrients because it needs to process that toxicity that the sugar brings to our body. And then again, we don't have the nutrients to create optimal health. So we also have an extreme epidemic of overusing antibiotics and many other medications like heartburn medications and aspirin and ibuprofen and painkillers and things of that sort. So antibiotics kill off the microbiome, and even just one antibiotic dose can really be devastating to the whole gut microbiome. And it can be very hard to recover from just taking one round of antibiotics. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it if you absolutely need to, but ultimately, these are things that are really causing problems in the body. And ultimately, if we can reduce and eliminate and not let it be, something that we go to just for the sake of it because we don't have better options. Many antibiotics are given for viruses and they don't work against viruses. And so ultimately, we've really got to cut back and build our health so that we don't have to use antibiotics and other medications as much, which we can do through good nutrition. Additionally, we've got rampant mental health illness going on. Some statistics say that the average adult, so 45% of adults 35 to 44 reported mental illness in 2023, compared with just 31% in 2019. So that is a 14% increase in basically a 3-year time period. And yes, COVID was a massive aspect to creating more mental health, but we really, really are kind of going off the deep end in many ways. We're struggling, we're stressed, and we don't know how to cope. And so these are the things that are really bringing us down. So the other thing is that we really haven't had the ability to understand nutrient density until now. We've got new tools that we're using that are allowing us to better understand nutrient density. So instead of just looking at singular nutrients, right, studying just vitamin C or vitamin A or this or that, we now have a greater capacity through something called metabolomics, where we can really look at the combination of vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals in foods. There's such variation in our foods. You could go buy a grape at a one grocery store and it could have 15 times the nutrients of a grape from another grocery store grown in another country, most likely. And so we've got this great deal of variation. And the Bionutrient Food Association is a group here, and this is where this picture comes from, that is helping us to understand a little bit more about how nutrients are built in foods by way of different growing practices. And so they've created a handheld tool that you can look at, that you can take to the grocery store and test your foods to see what the nutrient density is. And then they're giving that feedback back, and they're working with farmers as well to look at their growing practices and understand how those are influencing each other. So check out the Bionutrient Food Association, very interesting work that they're doing. Now, I also want to make note here that these phytonutrients that I was talking about, which are basically chemicals that plants produce in order to protect themselves in the field, are very beneficial for our bodies, definitely in preventing cancer. And ultimately, these secondary plant compounds are like nutritional dark matter, because we have barely scratched the surface of understanding what they do for us, but they do a great deal, from decreasing tumor growth to being antioxidants in the body and many, many other things. Basically, they can act as antibiotics. You know, alicillin is a plant compound that can act like an antibiotic, but it doesn't have as devastating effects in the body. So we're only tracking about 150 nutritional components in our food at the moment, and that is 0.5% of the roughly 26,000 chemical compounds that are documented in our food. And so that's only about, that 99% of the biochemicals present in our foods are untracked by nutritional databases. And that's just pretty unbelievable. We have a lot to learn. And I'm very curious to learn how all those phytochemicals work with our microbiome inside of our body. This is a picture of some tomatoes that were being grown in a farm I was on New York, and they were testing how to increase the anthocyanin content, which is an antioxidant, and that's what makes them purple, in these tomatoes to use as medicinal foods. So that's very interesting, beautiful. They were beautiful tomatoes. So I want to reflect for a minute on the likeness between the soil and the gut. It is very, very similar. And I think this is pertinent because I think we need to think of always about as above, so below. You know, what's happening inside of us is always happening outside of us in some other place. And it's all very connected. So if we look at plant roots, this is called the rhizosphere, where the plant roots go into the soil. And this is effectively the digestive area of a plant. And it's very similar to the villi in the human gut, which I'm going to show you a picture of in a second. But as you can see, this rhizosphere is sitting in the soil. And within the soil is all of these different microbes. So AMF, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, bacteria, viruses, protozoa, all different kinds of things are there in the soil, and those microbes are there to mobilize the nutrients and allow them to become plant available so that the plant can take them up and grow. And so essentially, as the bacteria and microbes are digesting, secreting enzymes into the soil, they are doing the job of making those nutrients available, which is very similar to the gut. So let's look at that. So here we have the gut, and these are the villi. These are the basically projections that come up out of the gut. And these projections here are kind of like the rhizosphere, right? They are going to take in the nutrients and they're going to take it into the body so that we can do all the enzymatic and chemical processes that we need to do. Now, what's very interesting is the lumen of the gut, which is basically the hole that goes from our mouth to our anus, but especially in the intestines, that space is called the lumen. And that lumen is like the soil because within it is all of the nutrients that we're eating from the food that we're eating, all of the microbes that are digesting those nutrients and secreting enzymes to help us, and also nurturing these enterocyte cells that line the GI tract, which I'm going to talk about. So they're parallel digestive systems. And it's very interesting that as we have damaged the soil by way of using glyphosate and tillage, our guts have severely degraded as well. And so these things need to be looked at together. So now I want to talk a little bit more about the microbiome and just reflect on how very much this is influencing our body. So we have about 10 trillion human cells in our body, and they are outnumbered by bacterial cells 10 to 1. So we have about 100 trillion bacterial cells in our body. So the 1% of human DNA in our body is equivalent to the size of our big toe. And the rest of our body, if we were looking at it from that perspective, the 99 other percent of our body is going to be DNA from the microbiome. So these little critters inside of us are very much influencing so much that happens in our psyche, in our body, and it cannot be underestimated. So it's really, really important that we keep track of keeping a good, healthy microbiome. So what happens? These microbes in our gut are basically eating the fibers and the different things that come into our nutrition, specifically fiber. They really like to eat fiber. And they turn that fiber into something called short chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, propionate. And ultimately, they're also secreting gases like hydrogen sulfide and ammonium and hydrogen and methane and carbon dioxide. And those short chain fatty acids and those gases are picked up and signaled by something called the vagus nerve. And then that vagus nerve takes messages back up to the brain and tells our body to do something or to not do something. But in general, this very important piece of our wholeness is really influential. So let's talk a little bit more about the microbiota gut-brain axis. So ultimately, the vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve that comes out of our brain and travels all the way down our body, pretty much touching the good majority of the organs along the way, but very important in heart function and beating of the heart and heart rhythm, and then digestion in general. So basically, this is a nerve that is about 80% afferent. So it's 80% afferent nerve fiber. So 80% of its messages are coming from the gut back up to the brain. And then 20% are efferent, coming from the brain back down to the gut. And in general, as this nerve senses those metabolites that I was talking about earlier, it will stimulate the brain to make different chemicals like serotonin, epinephrine. Now, much of that is also made in the gut, the serotonin, but that has to kind of travel back and forth from the brain up the vagus nerve and down to get that make those secretions happen. And so in general, as we are working, as we are experiencing stress or different things like that, it's influencing the messages that the vagus nerve is giving. And so if we are experiencing a lot of stress, or even if we just had a traumatic experience like a long time ago, but it's still affecting us because we oftentimes very much hold on to the past, it will stimulate inflammatory components in the gut, which then can make the gut leaky. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute as well. But in general, we want to really stay in a good parasympathetic nervous system space. So we want our parasympathetic nervous system to be operating, which is what the vagus nerve really controls. And the parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and digest, versus our sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, right? And so in general, when we have a healthy toned vagus nerve, we can really stay in that rest and digest, get more out of our food, have less inflammatory components happening in the body, secrete less cortisol, which I'll talk about here in a second as well, and basically just be able to have a healthier state of being. And so ultimately, the heart rate variability is how we can measure vagal tone. And a lot of people are like, what is vagal tone? I don't even know. I can't wrap my head around it. How do we know if our nerve is toned? Well, ultimately, that can be looked at by looking at heart rate variability because the vagus nerve also is affecting um, the heart rate. We can wear little rings or things like that that are looking at that heart rate variability and getting that feedback and telling us where we stand. And so the consistency of our heartbeats can give us a little bit of a reflection. So that's one way to look at that. So while we're still on the topic of vagal nerve, I'd like to give you a few suggestions for how you can improve the tone of this vagus nerve that runs through your body. So it's actually pretty easy to do if you do small things throughout the day on a regular basis that can help improve tone. And so in general, what those things would be are things like singing, chanting. You can even just hum like a like making a bumblebee sound in the back of your throat for an extended period of time. That basically stimulates the vagus nerve. Additionally, you can meditate. Meditation, getting your brain into a theta brainwave state, can help with vagal nerve tone. You can also do like inner ear massage where you you hit certain points in your ear and you just stimulate the skin. You don't even really have to massage the ear. But if you go onto YouTube and you type in vagal nerve tone, you're going to see a lot of videos that you can do to help tone that vagus nerve. So, meditation, chanting, singing, gurgling, or even gagging a little bit, like stimulating your gag reflex when you're brushing your teeth, can also be very helpful. And doing cold showers, taking hot cold contrast therapy can stimulate the vagal nerve tone. So those are all just a few suggestions for you to add into your regimen. And it's like doing those things throughout the day in small increments and building them up and kind of stacking habits can help you improve your vagal nerve tone. So give them a try. So additionally, the HPA axis is influenced by the vagus nerve, and this is what is upregulated with stress. And so it's part of our endocrine system, and it stands for the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And it's in charge of secreting cortisol in the body so that we can, one, just get up and go in the day on a normal day when we're not stressed. But additionally, when we are experiencing a great deal of stress, it can mobilize that cortisol so that we can either, keep going in a very stressful day with a lot of um, timelines to meet or something like that, or literally, run from the tiger, even though there's not many tigers around. But anyway, ultimately, this is something that if it can become overstimulated as well. And if it becomes overstimulated, it can eventually burn out where you just can't produce the cortisol at the same rate that you used to be able to. And that can cause adrenal fatigue or adrenal burnout. And so, in general, managing stress is very important. And toning the vagus nerve can help keep this HPA axis working well. And one of the books I want to mention, because I really can't emphasize enough how much stress influences our health. And even when we kind of tend to underestimate stress in this society because we've normalized it. And so in general, we just think that these fast-paced lives we're living, like, oh, well, it's okay, I'm not that stressed. But the reality is that your body is experiencing a great amount of stress, more so than maybe you experienced through the past thousands of years, depending on what time and era you were living in. But ultimately, there is a really good book out there that's called The Body Keeps Score, and it really talks about the influence of stress and how much our bodies can hold on to stress from the past. We often live in the past, and we we define ourselves by the past. And in many ways, this can really inhibit our ability to heal our body. And so really learning how to move forward from the past and also not, overly worry about the future is very helpful for decreasing stress and learning how to manage stress. So yeah, The Body Keeps Score is a really great book that I highly recommend listening to or reading. And then another really good book on how to kind of break the habit of being yourself, right? If you're kind of stuck in old paradigms, is a book by Joe Dispenza called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And he really helps people learn how to use meditation as a tool to break free from the past and project a brighter future. So I highly recommend that as well. So let's go on and start looking at inside of the gut. So basically what we have here in this picture is a diagram of a healthy gut on the left-hand side and an unhealthy gut on the right-hand side. And when we have a nice healthy gut, what you can see here is we've got the good bacteria in here. So there's commensal bacteria, which are the lactobacillus and the bifidobacter and different things like that. And we have these good commensal bacteria that we want to be in the higher ratios, right? And then there's going to be opportunistic bacteria. It's always in our gut, but is it kept in check by a healthy gut and the commensal bacteria? When it's not, we start getting some of these other opportunistic bacteria becoming more predominant than our commensal bacteria, and that's what can cause problems. And so on the left-hand side, we've got this really nice array of good good microbes. And then what we also have is this nice mucus layer lining here that's sitting on top of these enterocyte cells. And the enterocyte cells are simply one cell layer thick that controls everything between the lumen of our gut and what goes inside of our body. It's very, very, very thin, and these cells are constantly regenerating themselves. But ultimately, what's happening is these cells, if we were to stretch them out, all the villi and microvilli, the surface area would be equivocal to a tennis court. So that's pretty unbelievable. That's a lot of surface area to digest a lot of different nutrients that we need. And these bacteria are helping us do that because they are making enzymes, they are munching on things, breaking them down. They are kind of acting as protectors to these little microvilli hairs that project up off the top of the enterocyte cells, which we'll talk about in a minute. But when these are healthy, these little junctures between each cell stay very tight and they don't allow undigested food particles to move into our body. And so this is just a very good functioning gut. We've got the right amount of different immune cells being produced, the right amount of nutrients are being digested, this mucous membrane protection layer is in good shape, protecting those enterocyte cells, just like plants protect the soil. And so ultimately, this is a good functioning thing that we've got going on. Over here, when we get these opportunistic bacteria, we start getting a degradation of that mucous membrane lining. And as that mucous membrane lining decreases, we start having some atrophy of those enterocyte cells. And this is what allows undigested food particles to move into the gut. And then we start building immune cells that are highly inflammatory. Pathogens start getting inside of the body. We start creating food intolerances because undigested food particles are going actually into the body and our immune cells begin attacking them. So just to give you a little more funny picture of the life of an enterocyte. So again, we've got the villi. These are the little enterocyte cells that I was showing you on the last one. In the crypts at the base of these different villi, that's where the enterocytes are hatched. And so they hatch, they slowly move their way up the villi as they grow and age. They need to be young, they need to be robust so they can do the job of digesting. The little hair-like projections that are coming up off their head are secreting enzymes. And it's that mucous membrane lining that's allowing them to stay healthy so that they can secrete those enzymes and digest the foods. And ultimately, these are our human cells. They're not microbes, just FYI. giving them faces might make them seem like they're microbes, but these are, just the human cells that are being born. And so as they begin to age, they then slough off, and we're constantly regenerating these enterocyte cells. And they are 100% fueled, not 100%, they're about 75% fueled. The energy that they need to produce in their nucleus and that type of thing is about 75% fueled by the short chain fatty acids and the energy that the microbes in the lumen are secreting. So they're taking that in and using that as nutrition to stay strong and healthy. And then as they absorb, it goes into the bloodstream and the lymph that sits in the middle of that villi that projects up out of our gut. So this is kind of like an up close. If we were looking at that first diagram of the gut, this guy on the left, nice, robust, healthy, lots of microvilli on top that's producing the digestive enzymes. That is going to be the good, healthy cell. Where over here, if we lose that mucous membrane lining and the opportunistic bacteria become high, we start getting atrophy and we get sick enterocyte cells that are sad. All right, so, and this is how we often begin to get food sensitivity. So I just want to address the difference between food allergies versus intolerances and then food sensitivities. So food allergy is like you're usually born with it, or it begins very soon after when you're young. They are an immediate allergenic response that are going to cause, major reactions. Some people need EpiPens for these types of allergic responses. They are IgE, immunoglobulin E responses. And so they go in and they cause, a quick action. Now, people can have allergies to dairy, but they can also have intolerances to dairy. So an intolerance is basically the lack of an enzyme that's used to digest a specific type of food. And so lactose is a sugar that's in milk, and lactase is the enzyme in our body that can digest it. And if you have a lactose intolerance, you don't have that enzyme and it's hard to tolerate milk. So sometimes you can buy lactose-free milk and or just avoid milk, and you will probably be better off. But ultimately, that's an allergy, an allergic reaction, and then an intolerance. Now, food sensitivities are a different thing. Food sensitivities often get developed because of a degraded microbiome and because the enterocyte cells begin to allow other undigested food particles to come into the body. And then the body begins to look at it like a foreign invader and attack it. Now, that's one way, but also we can create food sensitivities just against certain chemicals in foods, right? So gluten and gliadin and casein and whey, well, casein in particular, but gluten and casein. Some people don't have the enzyme being secreted by the little microvilli called DPP4. And this is very common in kids with autism and other autism spectrum issues. And basically, when they don't have that DPP4, these the proteins start getting broken down into peptides, dipeptides, where it's just a few of the amino acids kept together. And so in the case of gluten and casein, those peptides are what we call like a gluteomorphine or casomorphine. And they have a molecular structure that's similar to a morphine substance. And when a person without that DPP4 enzyme can't break it down, ultimately it can actually act like morphine in the body. And so that is why sometimes with autism spectrum disorders you can see stimming, or different behavioral issues that almost seem like when an ASS person eats gluten or casein, sometimes it can almost seem like they're drunk, like right after they eat them. And so that's basically an enzymatic issue, but a lot of times when the gut improves, you can lose your sensitivity to that just because the way the body can begin to digest those things again. There's also things like phenols and salicylates that can be problematic in food. So some people with ADD do something called the Feingold diet and avoid phenols and salicylates to try to increase and improve focus and behavior. Histamine-rich foods. There's histamines in everything: meat, beans, fermented foods. Some people do not have the DAO enzyme, and they cannot break down histamines as easily in the body. This I see becoming more and more common. And then goitrogenic foods, like the ones in this picture here, are going to be our cruciferous vegetables, and they can actually inhibit the thyroid from taking up iodine and copper and zinc and various things that it needs to function optimally. And so people who are hypothyroid sometimes cut these out of their food, cut these out of their diet so that they can not slow down the thyroid any further. Now, hyperthyroid people, overactive thyroid, sometimes use them to help slow down. But this isn't the case in every single person who has a thyroid issue. So, also with nightshade foods, there are things that can increase intensity of rheumatoid arthritis. Oxalate-rich foods can cause problems in people with gallstones and different things like that. And then some carbohydrates are removed from the diet because it can be helpful for rebuilding the microbiome and dealing with seizures and various things like that. So those are just some of the food sensitivities that you can take into consideration, but usually these occur because of a lack of health in the microbiome and the gut. So one last thing to go over here with processes taking place in the body: methylation, transsulfation, and sulfation are all really, really important parts that we need to nurture. They can happen by way of having plenty of cofactor nutrients in our diet. So things like folic acid, B12, methionine, certain amino acids that we need to take in that we can get from fish and eggs and beef and things like that. But these are very important because methylation has everything to do with DNA expression. And then these other processes, well, methylation and transsulfation and sulfuration, have huge amounts to do with digesting heavy metals, with increasing Th1 immunity and decreasing Th2 immunity. We want the Th1. We want to be able to remove heavy metals from our body. We want to be able to make good energy transfer in the mitochondria of our cells. We want to keep our villi and our gut healthy. We want to keep antioxidant function in the body by way of glutathione happening really well. And so these three processes are really big in that arena. And without the nutrients that we need, we can't do these processes. And again, this is something that's very common. The MSS pathways are very degraded in a lot of children with the autism spectrum disorders, not just children, but adults as well. And a lot of this sometimes, especially methylation, can have to do with our epigenetics, right? And we can be born with genes that are varied in a way that can be deleterious to our health, or they can become that way by way of the different things that we're being exposed to as we move through life. So this is what epigenetics is, right? It's the study of heritable gene changes in genes that occur without the change in the sequence of our DNA. And so, these genes are not established, they can be changed, and they're influenced by stress in a major, major way. So that's another reason why I brought stress up earlier, but also by exercising. If we over exercise, if we, as we age, these gene mutations can occur, toxic exposure. And so in reality, we really have to be paying attention to the epigenetics that we might be dealing with. Now, I'm going to talk about a few different genes that can be varied. The first one is the MTHFR, and that's basically the gene, and there's a number of different SNPs. So SNPs are components of the genes that can be varied in people. So you can get like a DNA test and know which SNPs of the MTHFR are varied in you. And if you have some MTHFR gene variations, which about 40% of the population do, it is very hard for you to methylate. And so it can cause a lot of issues in the body. You can't detoxify as well. You might not be able to process estrogen as efficiently and things like that. And so ultimately, you want to really focus on doing all that you can to keep your genes clean. So even if they are varied, you can do things like eating a lot of green leafy vegetables on the regular basis to get the B vitamins and different things, and eating, good grass-fed meats to help provide those B vitamins, and trying to limit chemicals in your body as much as possible, and trying not to drink or smoke because those things can really do a number on MTHFR as well. So we also have COMT, and COMT is basically going to be the gene that is going to affect your mood and your focus, and it helps your body handle estrogen. DAO is basically the gene that can make you super sensitive to certain foods, like the histamines that I was talking about in particular. Then additionally, we have MAOA, and this is going to be the gene that controls dopamine, epinephrine, and serotonin, and mood swings and carb cravings. So we can have propensities towards carb cravings more than somebody else if we have a genetic variation in this gene. The GST and the GPX is basically looking at your body's ability to rid itself of chemicals and glutathione production, which is the #1 antioxidant in your body. And then the NOS3 gene has a lot to do with how blood moves through the body. And so this can be heart issues, it can be erectile dysfunction, but we can do things that help clean up this gene if we've got a variation in that as well. And then the PMT gene supports your cell membranes and liver, and how we produce phosphatidylcholine, which is basically the main thing that makes up our cellular membranes and controls things moving in and out of the cell. So if we have healthy cell membranes, we can have better health. And so these are all genes that are pretty commonly varied. And the good thing is that you can do the things to clean them up. And one of the books that can help you learn more about this is called Dirty Genes. And it is just a great book that I highly recommend if you want to learn a little bit more about this and all the different nutrition pieces that you can do to clean these potentially varied genes up. Now, I also want to talk about autoimmune disease because it has a lot to do with the microbiome. So 1 in 5 Americans has an autoimmune disorder. And an autoimmune disorder is when the body begins to attack its own tissues. And they can be very, very devastating to people's lives. Lots of fatigue, lots of pain, just an inability really to show up in the world in the way that most people would like to. And so likely somebody that you know has an autoimmune disease. And what's very interesting is that for a long time they thought that autoimmune diseases were inherited. And it's becoming more commonly thought that it's actually the microbiome inheritance. It's not necessarily gene inheritance, although I do believe that that plays a role, but that it's more of how we inherit different microbiomes from our mothers as we are born. And so ultimately, really improving the microbiome can help with autoimmune diseases. All right, so let's talk about some of the things that we can do from a nutrition perspective. So we have to be thinking about cleansing on a daily basis at this point. So give us this day our daily cleanse. So eat really clean whole foods, preferably organic if you can. Don't try to buy foods that don't come in packages. The plastics that are wrapping up your foods are putting toxins into those foods, and ultimately we're eating them. And those toxins are often toxins that cannot be processed. They stay in our bodies and wreak havoc for a very long time, particularly the plastics. We want to eat 5 to 9 servings of vegetables a day, and that's a lot of vegetables, but ultimately that is the fiber that's going to help feed the gut microbiome. It's also going to help bind to toxins and the biles that we produce to digest our foods. It binds to those, it helps pull toxins out of the body, and we need a lot of fiber, 35 to 45 grams of fiber per day. And eating 5 to 9 servings of vegetables, preferably the green leafy ones as much as possible, can really help do that. I want you to drink 80 ounces of purified water, not tap water, because tap water has a lot of chemicals in it. And unfortunately, the Brita, set on the top of the counter Not only removes just a very little bit amount of chlorine, so I highly recommend getting a water purification system for your water because a lot of toxins are taken in via the water supply. I already mentioned avoid buying foods wrapped in plastic or storing foods in plastic. So get out of the habit of putting things in Ziploc bags or plastic containers. Get some Tupperware containers that are made out of glass or something else. And try to limit plastics. Don't use, Teflon pans, things like that. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Sleep is everything for our detoxification processes. So, and our circadian rhythm does its best job of detoxifying between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So please try to get 8 hours of sleep a night between those hours. And there's lots of ways to practice sleep hygiene that you can look up, but dark rooms and quiet and that type of thing. Doing exercises that allows you to sweat at least 3 times per week. Sweating helps release a lot of chemicals in the body. If you can't exercise at a level where you sweat, then go do an infrared sauna or a regular sauna or something where you can sweat and get that fluid moving in your body. And then also just eliminating the foods that can cause food allergies and sensitivities so that you can help improve the gut and make digestion better so that you have the nutrients that you need to do all the detoxification processes in the body. All right, so now I want to talk about the 6 soil and gut health principles. So the 6 soil health principles have been around for a really long time. I did not create them, but what I did do is I realized how similar they were. The things that we have to do to protect the soil to keep it healthy is very similar to what we need to do in the gut to keep it healthy. And so I created a parallel principle for the gut to the 6 soil health principles. So we always need to know our context, right? We need to know the circumstances that form the setting for an idea or decision that we're going to make to be fully understood. So that has a lot to do with our culture. It has a lot to do with health issues we might be dealing with. It's basically environmental, social, and economic. So, choosing what you eat is going to depend a lot on, what kind of traditions do you have in your family? And what kind of social settings influence how you eat and how much money are you going to spend on your food and what kind of environment is around you, what kind of foods grow in the environment around you, what are the cheaper foods around you. So knowing your context is really important, and that can help you make decisions around why you're doing things. And sometimes it's hard to change the cultural traditions, but they're not always the healthiest thing for us to be doing. And so sometimes we have to figure out ways to make changes in those. So the second one is armor the soil and the gut. And just as I was showing you earlier, the mucous membrane that surrounds the villi, right? That mucous membrane protects those uh, enterocyte cells. And so when we keep the soil covered with plants, we prevent erosion. We're putting more organic matter down in the soil as those plants die, and it's keeping the soil healthier. So in the gut, we can protect it by eating certain foods. So for instance, green tea, the catechins in green tea help make nice formation of that mucus lining of the gut to protect the enterocyte cells. Clove also does that. We can also eat mucilaginous foods like okra and aloe and nopal cactus and things like that that help build the gut. But the fiber as well is really, really important in this arena. The third principle is minimize disturbance, and basically minimizing disturbance in the soil looks like avoiding tillage, not using as much chemicals, watching how many passes people are doing with different uh, tools and equipment in the field that can compact the soil, reducing those inputs, whether they're physical, chemical, or biological. So keeping our water supplies healthy by not adding those. So that can minimize disturbance in the soil. In our gut, what that looks like is avoiding the refined foods. Those refined foods cause the opportunistic bacteria because they love to feed on those. And ultimately, they then will damage the gut. Additionally, if we're taking antibiotics on the regular, and unfortunately, especially in kids, if they have to take antibiotics regularly for ear infections or something like that, it can really damage the gut and prevent how they're absorbing food. So maybe trying alternatives until, and only using the antibiotics when it's absolutely dire straits. Taking GERD medications or antacids can be very, very impactful to the gut mucous membrane lining, as can NSAIDs and nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory pain medications. And then just trying to eat clean foods as much as possible whenever we have the capacity to do so. Buying organic foods, trying to buy organic grains and beans, because a lot of those dried grains and beans, they spray glyphosate on them right before they're harvested to desiccate the crop so that it can be harvested, so that it can dry out before it's harvested. So those are some ways to minimize disturbance. We want to support microbial life in the soil. So we do that in the soil by keeping continuous living root in the ground, because those roots exude sugars that feed the microbes. And so in the gut, we want to support microbial life by feeding it prebiotic foods. And everything in this picture is a prebiotic food. So onions, yogurt, the fiber in beans, the pectins in apples, different things in onion and garlic, and nuts and seeds. And so ultimately, when we feed our body these prebiotics, we're giving our microbiome the capacity to stay healthy, keep the right ratios of the commensal bacteria versus the opportunistic bacteria, and it keeps them functioning and healthy. And then we have encourage biodiversity. So out on the soil, on the land, we want to make sure that we keep a lot of living species both above and below ground. So when we are in a pasture or on a farm that's rotating its crops, they've got more biodiversity. That biodiversity is helping keep the microbes diverse below ground as well. And so in general, we want to make sure that there's biodiversity in pastures where the grass-fed beef that we are eating is coming from, because that makes their meat more nutritious. And we also want to make sure that in a farming scenario that they're not just farming the crop over and over and over the same crop, and that maybe they're doing cover crops that have a diverse mix of cover crops in between their food crops that they're growing. And so in the gut, what does that look like? It looks like increasing the amount of foods that you're taking in to get a nice wide variety of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. And so what that looks like is, eating about 30 different types of foods per week, making sure you get a lot of variation and rotating those 30 foods throughout the seasons, eating the foods that are in season generally tend to have nutrients and phytonutrients that we need during that season. There's a lot of vitamin A in cruciferous vegetables. We need that vitamin A to boost our immunity, and those vegetables are very commonly consumed in the winter. In the summer, the different vegetables like squashes and peppers that have a lot of those bright colors, those are very strong antioxidants and often can help protect us from the sun and different things like that. So these are things to think about to also keep the microbiome healthy, just eating a lot of variety and that type of thing. And last but not least, we want to integrate livestock. So when we're talking about land has always interacted with animals, and animals often fertilize the land by way of the way that they trample plants into the ground, by way of their manure and urine, putting nitrogen and different nutrients back onto the ground that has been recycled in their guts via their microbiome. And also by way of just chewing. Their saliva, when they chew a plant, causes that plant's roots to grow stronger. And so in our gut, we need to integrate livestock. And the way that we do this is by increasing fermented foods that we're consuming. So that can be lacto-fermented foods like the ones you see in this picture, or it can be things like probiotics, or it can be like a supplement probiotic, or it can be dairy, fermented dairy. And we can also increase our microbiome by way of eating wild foods as well. A lot of wild foods just have a bacterial coating on them, and when we eat those, we can ingest them and improve those things as well. So that is the 6 soil and gut health principles, and hopefully that gives you some context to think about how you can improve your gut lining. One other thing that I want to share with you is this is some of the different good bacteria that live in our gut and how they affect us. So Lactobacillus reuteri, it has a strong influence on boosting oxytocin in the body. And L-reuteri basically has taken a massive extinction in our guts over the last, 62, well, yeah, about 60 years. We're noticing just major decreases in this particular bacteria. And so some people think, especially Dr. William Davis, who wrote a book called Supergut, that this bacteria literally is what can be causing some of the mental health issues that we're struggling with, because when we don't produce oxytocin, we feel a sense of isolation, we feel loneliness, and it can be very challenging to people to experiencing that. And so he suggests taking probiotics from a supplement and making different yogurts and different things that you ferment yourself to look at specific issues, boost your oxytocin, to help improve weight loss, and to help an infant, have less bowel movements and various things like that. So you can see in this chart what some of those are. And that book, Super Gut by Dr. William Davis, is a great place to learn how to do exactly that. He walks you through the whole process. So check that out. So I just want to also talk about functional wellness testing. This is something that I offer in my practice, and it can be really helpful for getting a picture of what is going on inside of you, especially looking at GI health and your microbiome profile by way of a stool sample. And but there's other tests that you can do. You can look at these genetic variations through saliva. You can look at metabolomics, which are the organic acids that are coming out in your urine that are showing us what's happening on a cellular level in your body, because as your cells do certain things, they produce these organic acids that we urinate out. And we can look at those and understand, okay, how well am I detoxifying? How well am I metabolizing B vitamins? How well am I making energy in my mitochondria? So that's very interesting. And then food sensitivity testing, cellular nutrition assays to look at what is actually being absorbed by your cells. So these are all things that are very helpful in the body, and ultimately, these are all things that are very helpful to learn about what's happening in the body, so that then you can create a protocol and a plan that's very specific to you and what's going on, to both improve your GI function and help with specific issues that you're wanting to look at. So we see patterns in these tests, and those patterns, when you're working with a trained nutritionist, can see, I can see those patterns and be like, ooh, okay, I see that this is most likely something that you might be dealing with, and this as well. How's that going? Let's create a plan. So that is basically functional wellness testing. So I really hope that this was a very helpful thing for you to hear today, to get a bigger picture of what's happening inside of our bodies and how important it is to prioritize nutrition at this point. It really is so valuable to creating a life that you feel really good in and that you can live your best life in, because ultimately, if we're feeling ill, we cannot show up wholeheartedly. And I know that so many of us just want to show up wholeheartedly, but we don't have the energy, or we don't have the stamina, we don't have the bandwidth, from a perspective of being able to manage stress and that type of thing. So ultimately, in my practice, I work to help people regulate their nervous system through lots of different nervous system regulation tools. I help you find ones that are really helpful for you, specific, that are good for your lifestyle, and build up that vagal nerve tone, help improve the nutrition habits, and slowly integrate things so you can get to a place where you're doing a really good job with your nutrition. And then lifestyle, right? Like, what are the lifestyle things? What can you improve from, perspective of maybe meditation, or exercise, or dynamics of how you're looking at the past or the future. So thank you for listening very much. Again, Kara Kroeger. So glad that you joined me, and please visit balanceyourgut.com or landfoodlife.com if you liked what you heard today. I have the podcast, and you can hear many other things as well. So take care. Thank you so much.